I was asked by Jim to give a talk based on our book. As you may know, there's a recent book on family economics, jointly written by Pierre-André Kiapuri, Martin Browning, and myself. And it covers really a lot of topics. And of course, I can talk only about few of them, selected ideas from this book. But I, of course, recommend for all of you to look at it, because I think it's a relatively comprehensive statement of where family economics is now. So generally, one should wonder why we really sit here now and deal with this topic. First of all, is family economics to do anything? Why is economics to do anything with family? Why is the family to do with economics? And one reason that we are here is that there were very big changes that happened with the family. The family is a very old institution. It dates back 6,000 years. And it stayed more or less the same for a long time. In those traditional societies, marriage patterns, household roles, all these kind of things were stable. And in modern society, we observe a lot of changes that mainly very high turnover. I think that one reason for the interest in research in this field is this change. What happened? Why did it happen? And in fact, if I'll be honest, today even we are not sure what is the future of the family. We don't know if the family as we know it now, how will it look even say 80 or 50 years from now. So economists have something to contribute here, but there's many other fields which are involved. Sociology, for instance. And I think where I would like to, given this change that happened and the increase in turnover, I think I would like to talk a little bit about the contribution of Gary Becker here, who was the first to provide a unified account. Let's see where am I going well with the slides or not. Here. So in a world which there are no really strong norms and people can choose whom to marry, each man can decide which woman he wants to marry and the other way around. There is a big question how this whole thing worked out at the end. In fact, there's a nice Jewish story about a woman who comes to a rabbi and she asked him, what is God doing after he finished to build the whole universe, which, by the way, took him 6 days. And the rabbi told her what he's doing is he's a matchmaker. That's what he spends his time doing. Because it's a very difficult problem. How come that I match with my wife and you match with your wife and so on? It's almost a miracle. So economists can think about it the way economists think in terms of a model. And Gary Becker was one of the first to give such a model. And the recognition is that we need the coexistence of all this miracle that I will find a match that actually is a good match for me, and she will find a match which is good for her. And if you think a little bit about that, this kind of coexistence of so many coexisting matches requires an equilibrium analysis. And this is why economists actually has some monopoly in this field, relative sociology, because they understand this issue quite well from doing other kind of work, the concept of equilibrium. Here there's a sociologist, and she might contradict me, but I don't think sociologists have a concept of equilibrium. So what happens here is that we need to find, in a large system, we have somehow to identify the kind of matches which will be stable, that are stable in the sense that no one wants to move to another match. And this problem can be analyzed mathematically as a maximization problem, and it can be solved in principle as a linear programming problem. And this framework gives a solution which says that the stable assignment is such that it has to maximize the aggregate marital output of all possible matches. So there are many, many matches, and the stable one will be such that maximize the aggregate of the sum of all these matches. This kind of idea not only tells who marries to whom, but it also determines what will be the share of the man in the marriage and the share of the woman in the marriage. Those two things, which is sort of an important insight, are determined together. In other words, what will be the pattern of matches and how much each person will get in each match is determined together. This corollary of this is that, for instance, if you ask me what happens in my own marriage, if I'm stronger than my wife or I get more than my wife within a given marriage, this in turn will depend on all her alternatives if she leaves me, and it will depend on the whole matching pattern in society. So the power that you have in a given family not depends only on your attributes or your wife's attributes. It will depend on the whole matching patterns in society and the whole distribution of alternative matches. This is a bit too abstract in some sense, but it gives you a hold on the basic issues in the marriage market. It's a complicated system. It has to have all these features of coexistence of many individual matches. And in some sense, referring to my previous story, it's a miracle how it exists. Now, in economics, when we actually apply it, it's not completely obvious how we'll define what is the marriage market. Are we talking about the whole country? Are we talking about a given city or a given state? So it's not immediately obvious how to imply or to apply these ideas. But in some studies, you can see applications. And the paper we have together with Johnson here is an example of such application of such a model to the issue of cross-boundary marriages that was discussed today. We use such a model, a la Becker, in order to explain that. In terms of having said that, I want very briefly highlight some of the issues that we discuss in the book. I don't know if I can put the slide on. Okay, so one question which looks a very simple question, but it actually not so simple, is why marry? What's in it for us? Why should we marry at all? So to be frank, it's nothing to do directly with economics. There's always the natural desire to have children. And we discussed potential material gains from marriage, such as sharing public goods, coordination of work, and investment decision. What do I mean by coordination? My wife is not here, but she's in the city, so I have to be careful. Yeah, and she will tell her. But my wife supported me when I went to Stanford. I did not have the money to pay the tuition, and she worked. She worked hard, and I went to school. Of course, she had the anticipation that eventually I'll become rich and I will support her. And every day, once in a while, she mentions that she supported me. So this is what we call coordination in the family. And there are many examples like that. Now, I think that how does this coordination arises? It's by itself an interesting question. And one way to explain it is to go back to old times and to think about the emotional aspect of how two people live with each other, which is things which is asked in the Bible. Why a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his woman that he never saw before? And marriage, in some ways, it's based on what I call initial blind trust, a spark of initial blind trust. You need that in order to start the whole process. And when you have this, you can start to cooperate, and you can start to do all the other good things that can happen in families. Another thing that happens within families, but you don't have to create a family for this, is the use of public goods. Public goods can be used not necessarily by marriage, but they can be used simply by cohabitation or by some other arrangement. A marriage, in a way, does rely on this additional element, which is the emotional aspect. But and when you do family economics, if you don't bring the emotional aspect into consideration, I think you miss a lot. But you have to realize that emotional aspects as well as economic aspects vary over time. This is not something which is stable over time. So you also have to ask about the divorce. So marriage is typically in modern society not forever. A lot of people divorce. You ask yourself why a couple which lived together for a while and were matched and liked themselves, liked each other, decided suddenly to move away. Something had become different. And one insight of Becker is that a good event as well as a bad event can cause the marriage to break. So a bad event looks obvious, that if somehow a bad event happened, maybe you want to break but well, how come a good event also breaks the arrangement? And this comes back to the whole story I started in the beginning of the matching and the alternatives that you have in a marriage market. So Becker is consistent on this. And the point is like this. If the husband, suppose, loses his job and cannot support his wife, the wife will leave him and look for another husband. If the husband suddenly won a lottery and became very rich, what will he do? He can go to the market and get another wife. So if you think about the model, you can see that in both cases, divorce can be motivated by shocks, but the shocks could be either bad shocks or good shocks, and this is something that also comes about from this framework. One aspect, big aspect of the book that is really more the work of my colleagues than mine has to do with if I find it. With the question how families actually reach decisions. There are two stories in the literature, the simple story and a complicated story. The simple story is that women have, that families in some sense have a common objective. Okay, so the family under such a case is described in a very similar way to a person. So a person has preferences, family have preferences. So according to those preferences, either individuals behave or families behave. But it's not obvious that families have preferences. It sounds a little bit unlogical, because there are two different people, even if they live together, each one of them has may have its own preferences, even they share children, they share public goods, but they still might have different preferences. So there is an alternative model, which is called the collective model. As I said, it's really should be attributed to Kiapuri and Browning, in which they try to write down such a model in which people do two things. First of all, they act efficiently. So if you are in a family, you will still act efficiently, but the distribution will still depend on power. So it's a bit like bargaining models. And the way it's done in the Browning model is not directly not directly bargaining, but some rule of sharing that the family agrees to. So these rules that will be agreed by the family will depend also on outside elements. For instance, what's the situation in the marriage market, if there's a high divorce rate or low divorce rate, all these kind of elements affect the power of the husband and the wife in the family, because this describes the alternatives out of the marriage. So situations out of the marriage will affect relative power, and this in turn will determine the shares. The nice aspect of that, it's not simply an idea, because the idea here is not very new or deep. It's something that can be implemented empirically, and it's implemented in a way in which you can actually identify the power, the elements that affect the power, and you can identify the shares. And you can separate empirically between these two alternatives, the naive alternative of a single preference. If you think about this whole question, it's not a simple question, okay? Because how does a collective reach its decisions is not a simple question. So what the finding is that empirically efficiency is actually empirically valid. It can be, it has been found in many studies, but this idea of a single reference is not valid. So people often find in data that the idea of single decision maker is actually contradicted. And a simple example, which is you probably heard already, if you keep the income of the family fixed and you make an experiment, and these are real experiments because it often happen as a result of a government intervention, that more money is given to the wife and less money given to the husband, keeping things constant, aggregate income constant, you can see that the family behaves differently. Okay, so if the wife gets the money, then the family spends more money and more consumption on children, and say less on liquor and so on and so forth. So you can test this kind of things, and the general result is that the collective model somehow is necessary to understand what's going on within families. One big issue in application of family economics, as you're probably aware of this yourself because having worked in this field, is what kind of model you want to use. I mentioned to you the Becker type of model. And one element that appears there is the element so-called transferable utility, which makes that model work. This means that after the marriage is decided, the partner can transfer resources from among each other. It also means that when I meet someone with features that I don't like, he can compensate that by giving me money. So this is, or give me, not necessarily in terms of money, it can be given in terms of abstract units like love. All these possibilities of transfers is something that is usually put into the Becker ability to transfer is very, very important in the Becker framework. It's also important when you think about a divorce. So he has this result that if there is a law change, it may not affect a divorce, because if the law, for instance, supports the wife after divorce, they can still make exchanges within the family, so he will compensate her with money so that she stays in the marriage. So this kind of having transferable element is very important for many results in family economics, and you always have to be careful if you talk about this framework. But there's another framework which is going around, which is competing, and this one has to do with search frictions. So the Becker, and also the one we basically work with often in the book, assumes no friction. Now, when you have friction, it's a whole, many of the things disappear. The issue of efficiency is problematic, and many cases, what drives the decisions when you have friction is that that time matters, and you have to compromise. If time is, you cannot wait. In the models that I described to you, people simply match with each other almost by miracle, and it happens in a single moment in a given market. A model with friction, things take time. And if I don't want to wait for long for Mr. X, what I do, I compromise. Therefore, I get a very different marriage pattern under these two stories. And one can think which one is more realistic, and one can, in principle, test it. And this is also some, actually, distinction in that profession. There are some people who work only with this model, and another group who works with the other model, and they still need to be somehow matched with each other. I think it's an open question how to do these things in the best way. Now, few last comments. As I mentioned before, we have this big change in the family behavior, and this would call all scientists, no matter what is their field, to be interested in this. We want to explain things that we don't understand, and the many ways of doing it. And there are competing stories. It's not a monopoly of economists in a way. One can think it's even not naturally our business, but I already explained one reason we are in this business is our tools. We have the tools to deal with it. And it may be debatable if those are the best tools, but at least we have the tools. But there are alternatives in different fields which spend also a lot of time in this, and this is some of those are biological, some of them are sociological. And as an example, the issue of the division of labor is an important problem in economics, and it's an important problem in the family in general. Who does what? So in tradition, for instance, the men went to hunt and the women stayed at home and kept the children. And until this day, some of this element remains. That it's more likely that the men will work than the women. But things have changed, and nowadays we have more and more equality, both in what happens in the market and in what happens in home in terms of division of labor. But the issue of division of labor in economics is mainly an element, is based on efficiency argument, okay? So if I can go to the market and my wife stay at home, I can bring the money, and again, I can compensate her for that, and it's in a way, is the best for both of us. This idea of compensation is not exactly an idea that exists in biology. So that's one way that they think about the problem of unequal division of labor. So find the slides. Is this one? So again, coming back to nature, I told you that we have somehow to take into account all these elements when we talk about the family. And of course, a lot of things which are determined by nature. And one of them is that the nature of all species is that the woman can have only few birth, and a man can seminate many women. So this is a huge asymmetry between the role of men and the role of women in nature. Now, what does that has to do with the division of labor? Because a woman can have only few children, she has to invest more in them. Okay, they are more important for her. Of course, she would look for a husband who can, and this is the way it actually goes, who can help support her. So she will be choosy about the husband. But at the end, if it would be still the case that on this biological argument, the woman will take care of the children and not the man. So here is an example where these two kind of stories, the biological story and the economic story, deal with the same phenomenon, but provide a different explanation. And in fact, nowadays, many economists read this literature, and there's sort of now, of course, influence. I think I would be correct to say there's not that much cross influence between sociology and economic on that, except if there is relationship, which is, I think it's actually important relationship, it's in terms of the data. Both the economics and sociologists use the same data, well, more or less equally well, and ask similar questions, but the models are very different. Where in sociology there really no particular model, as far as I know, and economics there is the model. Sometimes economists are blamed that they care more about the model than about the data. I'm one of those. So, but this is the way it is, and I think I said enough.
Okay, Ozzy, questions? Yes.
Sorry, the last bullet point, are you saying that the outcome is different between the biology and the economics?
Not the outcomes, the explanation for the outcomes.
Okay, because the outcome can still be the same because the woman chooses the man with more resources.
Yes. But it's a bit more complicated. The wife is smart enough also to choose a husband who will be able to support her. So that's why women choose men rather than the other way around.
Right. So are there any ways to distinguish between the two explanations? Are there any way using the data to distinguish, to test between the comparative advantage story and the sexual selection story?
I don't know the answer to this. People are thinking about that. It's not, I cannot tell you what would be a good test to choose between those two things. You see, the time scale of the biologists is much longer. And we talk about, we can do things in a given moment in time. And so they have a very different perspective about how events evolve than we do. Yes?
If, let's imagine women desire male particular attribute, say aggregate, you have kind of utility, it's a function of many things, including family background in the old days and earnings potential, appearance, physical strength, whatever. And then men also desire a bundle of attributes from women, maybe different weights, beauty and youth and many other things, but they're all some kind of weighted. One question is if there are two models, if the world works in a world of comparative advantage, then we will expect particular kind of pairing that is not necessarily rank ordered. If it's rank ordered from high to low, then
yeah, but just a second.
Okay.
The model I outlined deals exactly with this issue. So, in other words, the matching that I was talking about, what it takes a given is the distribution, so the distribution of the attributes of the man and the distribution of the attributes of the woman. And based on these two distributions, you eventually decide what will be the matching.
yeah.
So,
I guess my question is what if there
no,
is
just
really,
a second. So it just comes back to the point that it's not your attributes relative to the attribute of your wife, which will immediately determine the outcome. But it's really the whole distribution of the wives out there allowed also to affect the outcome. So this is the perspective that we take in these matching models. Okay, so it's a mapping from distributions of attributes to the who marries whom outcome. So if I marry a woman with a lot of schooling, okay, I have to take into account not only that I have a lot of schooling and she has a lot of schooling, but what happens in general, and how many schooled women are and how many schooled men. And all this is taken into account into the model. Is it related to your question or not?
Okay, my question is, we observe pairing, but it's hard to consider a pairing a result of matching or purposeful matching. As I said, assume there's only unidimensional. We can compress multiple dimensions from most desirable to least desirable for both men and women. Then it could be just rank ordering. You are not the first one to pick, so it is a matching by external selection or others in the system sorting. It's a structure. If you are not highly ranked among all men,
Yes.
then it's not your pick until it's your turn. So you are matched, you're mediocre, you're matched to a mediocre ranked opposite sex. So how do we know? How do we know the one you're matched to is most optimal to you instead of one that is only available to you? It's not. It seems it's very hard to identify because you see. How do I know I'm most matching? The result matches may not be optimal.
You ask me as a researcher, or
Yeah. I'm just asking conceptually. How do I separate the if they're matched? Economists or some of you think it's optimal match that maximizes the utility, but in fact it is my bad luck, or it's not. It's a structure. I don't get to pick the the one that will maximize my interest. It is the best one I could. My choice set is more limited. In other words, my choice set is more limited because I don't have the capacity.
Okay. In the model, in the model that I described, if you are at the bottom of the distribution, you will usually get a lower. You will get a low woman, and also you will get a low share. You may be, if there are too many men, okay, and you are the worst man, you will not get any share of the marriage. Of the marriage, you will be just getting the same thing as a single person, okay? So it's sensitive to who is in the bottom and who is at the top. It deals with that. Now, I was careful to say that it's not completely obvious how this equilibrium that I described in the model actually works in practice. And the search model is exactly this kind of alternatives. It's more practical as to how the process works. But we have a lot of, this is not a sort of an open question. There's a lot of tests on this kind of things. So let me give you one other example. It's an example of a work we did also on matching by education. This is a problem I worked on with Kia Pori and Bernard Saleni. And we deal in this particular case with the fact that there's a lot of commonality in terms of education of husband and wife. Okay, if you look at the data, you find in the data that you married to a person of similar level of education. And the problem is that in order to this to happen, you also have to have the women should be similarly educated than men, because otherwise it will not work out. If you say all women are uneducated and all men are educated, it's impossible that you will always marry someone with the same education. So the fact of the matter is that empirically women, and this was I think mentioned in the talks here, now are more educated than men in many countries. And the question is, why is it the case? Because they get more education even though they have lower wages, okay? And our answer to this is that women take more education because they want to get better husband. So they compete for husband using their education. And the model actually works out along these lines. And this is something that we tested. Okay, you can test, in principle, what is the increase in the share of a woman if she has more education in equilibrium. Okay, this is something that we tested, and it's a paper that exists. I can send it to you if you're interested in it.
I guess I'll ask two simpler questions, more direct questions. First is, it seems like matching of this kind doesn't require optimization. You could just say some kind of different kind of optimization. It doesn't necessarily require kind of joint public good. Say if I just want something, you rank order and you're going to get matching in a similar way. So it may not be uniquely produced by public good argument. Second question is,
wait, those are separate.
I'm sorry, those are
public goods and this kind of optimality is totally separate issues, right?
yes,
So,
yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's what my point is.
Yeah,
You could optimize.
he wasn't saying they were the same.
I think the model there's a strong
No.
public good component of
There's a
this
joint
trade.
match. There's a joint match, but they're not, there's not necessarily, there's an output that shares, but it's not a public good. Because it can be shares, it can be divided.
You could have singular, just say if I design women's utility and when design men's utility, they're separate utilities, there's no public good, you could get similar results or very similar results. That's my point.
Yes.
He's describing the Gale Shapley.
Yes, Gale
algorithm.
Shapley, for example.
Right,
That's right.
but Gale Shapley, if you monetize it, you get something very close
Yeah, that's my
to
point.
an optimal mechanism. You get an optimal mechanism. One
Yeah,
way
it
to
is.
monetize it
Yeah,
is to
but there's no joint.
build it into a sign. Well, you could make it joint.
You could make joint, but you don't have to. That's my point.
Correct.
That's my point. You don't have to have a joint public good. You could still optimize on opposite direction. You could it's the same thing or very similar.
Well, there's still a kind of a Pareto optimality.
Yeah.
So you're in the core of this game.
That's right. So
So there
that's
is
my
a sense of optimality, but it's
yeah,
not.
it's not
It's
joint.
not. There's no transferable utility.
Yeah.
There's no measure, cardinal number.
Exactly. That's my point. That's my first
He's
comment.
not denying that. His book says that.
That's my. If you agree, we all agree, that's fine. If we all agree, that's fine.
Well, he hasn't spoken yet.
In the Shapley kind of thing, there's no transferable utility.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
There's no joint utility. Yeah.
So your question is what
Why-
happens in reality?
Yeah, why, if it doesn't,
There's a
you
lot
don't
of
need
models. There's a lot of models that you can think about in terms of matching. Okay, so the question is, when we go to the data, what kind of model we want to use.
But anyway, it seems like joint public good is something economists make it up. You don't have to have that. But anyway, this is just a side point. I have 2 more points. Is that okay? We agree on the first point. You don't have to have that.
I'm not going to answer for him. Answer for me.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Go
Okay.
ahead. Are we okay with the first point? We agree.
Well, I think you could take Gail Shapley and you could use like Crawford-Kelso or some extension of that and monetize it, and you can get basically something that looks very much like transferable utility. So that in some sense you could implement this notion of Gail Shapley with transferable utility. That's well known. So it's not like they're at odds with each other, right? But you technically speaking, you can get an allocation that has some optimality properties that doesn't maximize an output per se, right? Because there is no output in Gail Shapley, right? There's the value of the man.
Yeah, man and woman.
He has a rank over men,
Yes.
and women have a rank over men. But there can be multiple equilibria too in Gail Shapley, right? That's one of the issues. It depends on the rule that you use in Gail Shapley, right? You can have multiple does the man propose and the woman then settle, or does the woman propose and the man settle?
It's a procedure.
It's a procedure. It's an algorithm. Sometimes they'll give you the same if you have transferable utility. You get uniqueness out of it, right? But we know that can happen, right? If you literally change the order in which people ask each other, that could lead to different outcomes. So, but you're not tied to transfer. You're not tied to output uniquely, are you?
Say it again.
You're not tied to a cardinal output for the match.
No.
Right. So he's not. So he's not disagreeing. Okay.
More quick comments. Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
One comment is the equilibrium. This is actually different between the equilibrium argument and the approach versus Gail Shapley approach, because Gail Shapley, you deal with who is left, who is available. You deplete people.
But that's an equilibrium.
It's
That's a kind of equilibrium, right? It is. Just an enumeration saying, well,
yeah, it is.
and it is who's left. So I propose to a woman, and she declines. And let's suppose there's truth-telling on both sides. Then she's off my list forever. I mean, you can show you never go back. Once you've been rejected, you're off. And then you just kind of go down the list.
But the way it's a property of the procedure
Right.
that you don't go away. Okay. So
The
it gives an outcome under some conditions.
Yeah. The third point is that you already mentioned. There is a huge cost of search, and you rarely know everyone you would like to try out. So the cost of interacting with possible mates is so high. So I guess you build a search cost into this.
You have to
into this model.
compromise. Once you have search, you have to compromise. You don't get necessarily you don't wait to mystery.
That's right, because there's a cost.
Yes.
So you lose compromise.
Yes.
On the second line, I think there's something I would like to add. Is that the ability of women to have only few children from different men, while a man can have many children from different women. Thus, the mother is usually willing to invest more resources on the child. I think biologists mentioned some other point, is that females, not to say women, females are always sure that the children are their own
And not
genes.
the husband, yeah.
Yeah. So there's an asymmetric information here.
People are working with this, the female.
What do you mean? I think near the end you said it's a woman choose the man. Why it's not the choosing each other? Why you emphasize it's a woman choosing the man? What do you mean?
I mean, it's in this kind of biological story, it's very important for the woman if this man is a good man who will support her or not. And for the man, it does not matter to him very much which kind of woman he is, because he only cares about his gene, so to speak.
So it's more crucial for her
yes, it's
to
much
choose
more.
the right man.
Yeah.
But the man don't care about the beauty of the woman?
He cares. Not biologically.
Okay.
He
I see.
biologically cares about his gene. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
By the way, it's a good question. What is beauty in biology?
Okay.
Maybe it's health or something like that.